Today we're going to be looking at Never Let Go from 1960, directed by John Guillermin, starring Richard Todd and Peter Sellers.
It's the story of a salesman whose car is stolen by a gang of car thieves who are led by a smarmy salesman stroke small-time criminal played by Peter Sellers in his first and possibly only straight role as a villain.
The research seems to point towards that. I think, there's Being There, I think, is the other one
Yeah,
people
I was going to say
say.
that's a grey area. It's such serious acting, even for a slightly comedic role, that you could say it's a straight role. But yeah, it was at the time it was his first straight bit of acting, if you will. It was a deliberate choice to play a villain in a movie rather than kind of a comic role or a clownish role.
What's that accent he's doing? You're Northern. Do you recognise it?
I kind of thought it was generic Northern, but then there was bits of Scouse coming in there occasionally.
It's not Nottingham, is it?
No, I don't know. It's just I have some things to say about the performance later, so maybe we can get into it then. Yeah, so this was your choice, and I fear it'll be the least downloaded podcast in our city just because it's such an oddity.
No, that's Downhill Racer. Poor Downhill Racer, a masterpiece that if people won't even look at, will they? Yeah, this was just one of those weird things. I've set up like a Twitter account for the podcast, and I was kind of just following a few threads about British films, and it led me to an IndieWire article on British crime films that was written in 2013. And it had, the usual suspects were in there, like Long Good Friday and Mona Lisa, and then stuff that, people have probably seen, Gangster Number One and Croupier. But then it had a bunch that I'd never heard of. It Only Rains on Sunday.
Oh yeah, that's great.
Squeeze, Sitting Target. Like, I've never heard of those. And it also had this film, which just, I don't know, it piqued my interest. And I watched it and recommended it to you. And here we are. You didn't reject it, so,
Well,
unless you're going to slam it.
I've been watching a bit of Peter Sellers lately. I watched his one film as director, Topaz, which I think also counts as serious acting. And I watched for the first time ever, I watched The Smallest Show on Earth quite recently, which I loathed.
Oh, really? Okay.
Which is really surprising. So I'm always in the mood for Peter Sellers.
Sure.
But yeah, you watch it and then you start to research it, and it's such a focal film for so many people, and it's when you start looking at the connections of the people working on it and in it and everything, you realise it does have a place in history.
Yeah, definitely. I was just surprised how kind of lean and raw and exciting and sort of relatable it was as well. I loved the lead character, John. I just think like his journey, it's really, really credible. I love it.
I wasn't as involved in it dramatically, but I did find there's lots and lots of nice filmmaking touches throughout it, and lots of accidentals and things that I really, really enjoyed, especially the second time round.
I didn't do too much research on the background, I have to say.
There's not a great deal out there. Did you look up John Guillermin? I'm sorry, apologies to anyone who's a fan of John Guillermin or Guillermin. I do not know how to pronounce that name. I know that he's...
Guillermin, maybe? Guillermin?
Yeah, I would always say Guillermin, but then that's because I'm English. But then he's a French background.
All right.
And his real name is Yves Jean, I'm assuming,
Guillermin.
Guillermin.
You have to do an accent.
So should we stick with that?
Yeah. Let's call him John.
John, yeah. So
let's call him the director.
The director's Wikipedia page is clearly curated by somebody who has a lot of time for him, because it's very, very well balanced. There's a lot of reports about how dictatorial and unpleasant he was on set. He was a clinical perfectionist who had an irascible streak, as it's described. Did a lot of screaming and yelling at crew and cast. Made pretty much all of his shoots an unpleasant thing.
Do you think that's a French thing? It's a joke, obviously.
But then at the same time, it's balanced out by lots of people, praising his meticulous eye and saying that were it not for the vagaries of fashion, he was unfashionable at the time.
He did all sorts of work, didn't he? There was such a broad kind of canvas of genres. And
I've always thought of him, just in passing, without having seen that many of his films, I've always thought of him as one of those directors of expensive stodge through the 70s, 60s and 70s.
God. He distilled that down.
He's one of those safe pair of hands directors that makes bad Bond movies, and that expensive producers like to hire because they won't do anything too crazy and they won't rock the boat, and they'll get a solid bit of work out of it that's inevitably a bit dull.
Yeah.
And then you look at the Towering Inferno, and you look at Skyjacked, and you look at I don't know what was the other one, the King Kong remake, and you think, yeah, you don't really think auteur, do you?
Tarzan and
Yeah.
Shaft in Africa.
Exactly. So,
Yeah,
but on the
he's not
basis of
quite a
this,
Lumet, is he? He's
no.
sort of
But I mean,
Lumet.
this is really interestingly made.
Yes, there's a lot of energy to it. I think a lot of kind of exciting. You can see how it might have been a gateway to Hollywood because that's pretty much where he leaves off, doesn't he?
And it's interesting. It's not like a first film. It's he's made many features before
Yeah,
this.
definitely.
It's not as if, and I don't think he was one of those like straight out of the starting gate directors. He did say by the time I read an interview with him last night, and he was talking about the time that he made King Kong. He said, I've been directing movies for 20 years. I've got craft dripping off my fingers. I can do anything.
Sure.
So I think he was one of those kind of craftsmen who kind of built up over the years rather than just like
Right.
burst out with an amazing first feature.
He did a second King Kong film, didn't he, with Linda Hamilton?
Yeah, in '96.
Yeah.
Yeah, not going near that. So yeah, he's not one of those like firebrand young talents. This is definitely like craft that he's learned that he's bringing to this movie. There isn't a great deal about the actual nuts and bolts making of it. There's only fragments I've picked up. There's precious little about it that I've been able to find, apart from the fact some bits about Peter Sellers. He's famous for being an empty shell who's inhabited by whatever party's playing, and apparently
he said that, didn't he? Isn't that's a direct quote?
Yeah, and this wreaked havoc on his marriage for the duration of the shoot because he was in the middle of a deep depression and very angry and playing a deeply unpleasant person, and his wife has stated that he was deeply unpleasant for the duration of the shoot. I dug out my Peter Sellers biography, which I was saving to read on holiday, but I had to dig out of the loft in order to get some notes. But there's almost nothing in there at all beyond that.
I saw that it's referenced in The Secret Life of Peter Sellers, the Jeffrey Rush film.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, apparently. But yeah, I didn't get time to go back and look at it. But
okay, well let's make a start. Well, it opens with a scene in a scrapyard, on location in a scrapyard beside a railway. And the whole kind of opening of the film kind of lays out what the scam is, with cars being stolen and the number plates replaced.
I really like it. It's sort of step by step, isn't it? And by the end of the opening sequence, you kind of understand how that scam works. You feel like you've had a little criminal insight.
And it's quite handy as well because it gives you, in the opening 5 minutes, gives you a bit of Adam Faith and a bit of Peter Sellers, who don't otherwise appear in the film until significantly later.
True.
Peter Sellers doesn't turn up in the main till about half an hour into the film. So you get confirmation Peter Sellers is in it.
Yeah, that's it.
But yeah, it's a really nice little sequence. I'd like a lot of the locations in this. I love the fact that most of this is shot on location.
Yeah.
There was 3 weeks of studio shooting, but you can't really tell.
No, it's just some of the interiors look a little setty, don't they? But yeah, I mean, I was searching for the main location on Google Maps, and it's been demolished.
Yeah,
completely.
it's demolished in '65.
Yeah, there's a really nice website called realstreets.com. Did you see that? And
No.
they have like before and after pictures of locations. The area where his car is stolen from, that's Southgate Road in Haggerston. And
Okay.
I've been on there, so when I cross-referenced on Google Maps, like I've definitely walked that street, which is nice. But then I was obsessed with trying to track down this main location where you have the garage and the cafe and things, and that's gone. It's been completely demolished and replaced with a housing estate.
Right, yeah. I was trying to work out where it was roughly supposed to be set, because it makes sense, Haggerston, because he gets off a bus at one point, and it's got, I think, Aldgate on there or something.
Yeah. It's definitely sort of east to North London, isn't it?
Yeah, it's funny. Did you see the Italian poster that the movie's called Gangsters at Piccadilly?
Yeah, that's right.
It's got a picture of Piccadilly Circus in the background.
Yeah, nice.
One of the delights of this film is all the locations. I mean, they're not familiar locations to me. It's just they feel so real. There's things that you get from them that you can't get otherwise. Like the opening scene by the railway, you get all that kind of open air.
Scrapyards tucked in by the railway.
Yeah, and you get the sound from the railway, and there's really nice use of location sounds in the film, and the sound generally is quite carefully and creatively used.
Yeah, there's a few nice places where the sound design bridges interior, exterior locations, but also, location to set work. It's really, really clever.
And the nighttime streets by Burgess, I don't know if it was dressed to be that way or if it's just a byproduct of when they were shooting, but it feels really wintry. Stuff that you cannot fake even these days in CGI. You've got like misty light in the background, and the streets are slicked with rain, and just I think it's one of the things that warmed me to the film in the first few scenes. Like, oh, that's really atmospheric. It feels like winter, doesn't it? And cars passing and real sounds and stuff like that, and and warm ambient light from windows and things. It's just really nice stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, there's a really nicely cut sequence where his John's car, as it turns out, is being stolen.
We have this sort of stepping stone introduction to the process of taking logbooks from scrapped cars, and then they find cars that match the logbooks, and then they replate them so that they can sell them on.
Yeah, and change the engine numbers and all that stuff.
Stolen cars. So we sort of follow this thread until we see the exact car that they're looking for, and that's where the camera just locks off and the titles roll, and we just sit there looking at this beautiful Ford Anglia.
But it's really nicely timed, and it isn't an optical. It's not a freeze frame. They just kind of timed it for the length of the credits. Let the camera roll, and then you get a really nice focus pull as Adam Faith steps into frame to steal it.
But I mean that sort of technique of kind of stepping stones continues. So once the car is stolen, we have the newspaper vendor across the road that's watching, and then we cut from his point of view into the building from outside of which the car was stolen to the guy that owns the car, and then we've kind of introduced everybody. We've introduced the kind of narrative thrust is the stolen car and the person that's trying to get it back, and I mean that's it simply.
Yeah,
I love that craftsmanship.
It's really carefully done and really succinct and really clear. Quite complex bit of storytelling done really, really nicely and creatively and clearly, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So the car theft has taken place outside Burgess Cosmetics Company, and then we cut to the inside of their sales office and we meet Johnny Cummings, who's our lead character. We forgot to mention that the theme music is a version of When Johnny Comes Marching Home, sung by Adam Faith.
Yeah, that's the thing I like least about the film, I have to say, is that tune.
It feels odd. I suppose it makes sense by the time you get to the end of the film. It works perfectly over, as end credits music after the events of the film, but yeah, it is odd. So we meet Johnny Cummings, who's a chipper, fairly confident, successful salesman.
Yeah, he keeps a smile on his face, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's happy to flirt with the girls leaving the office.
Yeah, that's it. He's just got kind of one-liner prepped for any occasion, it feels like. But also, we get the slight inference that he's kind of out of date a little bit as well, slightly old-fashioned.
Well, there's a bit of joshing with his competitor salesman called Spink.
Spink, that's a cool name, isn't it?
Who believes he has a scientific method. And
statistics, old boy.
Yeah,
statistics.
Scientific method. And then there's kind of a back and forth between them. It's quite interesting. This is something that happens a few times in the film. When Johnny leaves the scene, the camera just lingers on Spink, kind of looking up a little bit doubtfully and then going back to his figures.
He's a bit smug, isn't he, Spink?
Yeah, but it's something that happens a few times. I'll flag it up when it happens again, but the scene, Johnny's our lead character, but we're not exclusively in his point of view, and we are given other people's viewpoints in a scene. Often things definitely are tagged onto the end of the scene after he's left to give you slightly unsettling.
It builds up to a beautiful moment halfway through the film where,
Johnny steps out into the street, finds he's had his car nicked.
He does have that line just before he steps out, and he says, it's like his kind of famous last words, isn't it, where the Spink says, maybe have a look at statistics and try and improve your game a little bit, and he just says, oh boy, I've never had it so good, and that's his kind of famous last words. Like you say, he steps out in the street and his car has been nicked.
So I've got notes. It's a very sort of noir sequence with sort of low angles and strong key lighting in this.
Yeah, but I think it's just like you say, the winter mist, the hard lighting, the sort of chaos. John Barry's kicking in now as well, isn't he? Trying to run off with the film.
Should we talk about John Barry now at this point?
Yeah, I think it's. I mean, I love the score. I have to say, I don't know if it's entirely appropriate, but there's moments where it just, it really gets my blood pumping, and I'm really excited by it.
Right. There's, do you know it was his first movie credit?
His first film, because he's friends with Adam Faith, wasn't he? He was...
that makes sense.
Yeah, so they'd met on so Adam Faith, who plays the teenage car thief Tommy Towers, he was also a pop star by this point. I think he'd had one or two hits.
He'd done a TV appearance too.
Yeah, so the TV appearance, I think John Barry was on that as doing incidental music, and maybe he'd written the theme music or something.
Okay.
And they collaborated together through most of Adam Faith's music career, and so I think he brought him onto this.
Okay, that makes sense. I do not like this music at all.
Oh no, because I was like, we're going to drop in bits of music here because the music's even better than the dialogue and stuff.
If it means I have to listen to this soundtrack again, we will not be dropping bits of
Oh
music
no.
into this edit.
Oh my god.
I do not like it at all, but I think there's a reason for that, and just by pure coincidence. So I'm gonna have to reach for my phone because I took a screenshot of it. I follow the movie critic Jonathan Rosenbaum. He has a website and he posts old reviews and new observations and stuff daily, and it's always really interesting. He did a little thing about director Richard Brooks' use of music. He made Blackboard Jungle and also Looking for Mr. Goodbar, and he's comparing and contrasting how he used jazz in Blackboard Jungle and disco music in Looking for Mr. Goodbar. And he pointed out something that hadn't really occurred to me, and I guess you had to be there, but at the time this movie came out as well, jazz was quite edgy and dark, and it was kind of like used to suggest foreboding and doom. I think the quote here I've got is, the fact that Brooks no longer uses jazz to attain this effect may say something about the changing status of jazz in movies since the 50s. It's gone from an expressionist voice of doom in Blackboard Jungle, The Man with the Golden Arm and Touch of Evil, to simply another set of colours within the musical spectrum. Indeed, now that jazz in one form or another can be found in elevators and dentist waiting rooms as often as in bars,
Sure.
its implicit meaning in films is hardly the same as it once was, which would explain why I hate it so much. I mean, I imagine it worked perfectly in context and at the time, but just for me, it just sounds like big band light jazz. It sounds like trad jazz. There's bits where it feels quite moody, where it feels like movie score, but then it just suddenly goes and it just sounds like show tunes.
Really, yeah. But I like that aspect of it. I like it when it goes from just like you hear like one bongo being slapped, and then suddenly you get the horns blaring in. It really sort of caught me by surprise. I thought it was really exciting.
I just think just a question of taste. I'm not.
Maybe we'll play a little bit now, and you can make your own mind up, dear listeners. So that's the music I like. Matt hates.
I've just got a note to ask you to stop introducing me to films that desperately need rescoring. Like you lent me Hoosiers, which I saw for the first time.
Yeah, the score really
so 80s, isn't it?
It's really distracting actually.
But again, this is another of those where I would just, if I could, strip off the score and replace it with something else.
Yeah, anything.
If there's anyone out there who's a John Barry fan who can point me in the direction of some really good, and I'm not being snarky, this is not a piss take, because I would like to listen. I've been listening to a lot of soundtracks lately, and I would like to find some really good John Barry. There was an article on the Quietus website recently which pointed me in the direction of some not very good scores. If someone can flag up some good dark John Barry music for me, I would love to hear about it. I will go out and buy it and listen to it.
It's quite interesting when they're stealing the car. He basically has like a keyring full of keys, and one of them fits. I wonder if that was kind of...
Yeah, I think that was there's
All he needed was 10 Anglia keys, and one of them would probably work.
There's a similar sequence about 7 years later, I think, in The Samurai, the Melville movie.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Where he has to steal a car, and he reaches into his pocket and takes out this massive bunch of keys, and he's got about 60 or 70 of them on there, and he has to kind of patiently try one key after another, and one of them will fit. So I think maybe in 1960 the templates were quite limited.
Yeah.
So after a brief visit to the police station, where we get some kind of expositionary conversation, and you get the first inkling that Johnny hasn't insured his car, so he's in trouble. He heads home. He gets a bus home, goes home to his flat, which I've got notes saying great set location ? Because it's a really good set.
Yeah, it's definitely a set, but yeah.
Like even the hallway feels like a
Production design is really good in this. All the interiors are really nicely crafted sets that feel authentic and lived in. And they never jar with that. Sometimes in movies of this period you get that strange sensation that the interior and the exterior don't match up.
Yeah.
Actually, saying that, the other day I watched Hobbs and Shaw. And Jason Statham's sister is supposed to live in those flats off Petticoat Lane.
Right.
And he goes up to the door of a council flat and then walks into this palatial interior where she's like got like gun racks hidden in the walls and stuff. I was like, the council won't even let you put up tiles without filling in a request form, let alone like a gun rack. This film, it's a very solid transition, interior to exterior, and
I just like all the little details, like, you know, the in the hallway outside his flat there's like a pram and bits, odds and ends that people leave in the hallway, and his flat itself has got really nicely kind of average furniture and decor, and you realise, he's, you know, it's dressed to look like the flat who's not a terribly successful salesman, you know.
He's a working class guy, isn't he? You know, that's the thing. I think you kind of forget in this period, working class guys wore shirts and ties to work,
and waistcoats
and jackets, and he came home and took his jacket off but kept the shirt and tie on and just put on his cardigan over the top as his kind of evening attire. There was still a sort of formality to the
I do
the
like
dress.
his evening cardigan.
Yeah.
I might take that habit on.
Yeah.
I've got a cardigan like that I think
Sure.
I'll wear in the evenings.
But you just wear it like with a pair of pants, like Lebowski or something. Walking around the house.
I like all the little things as well as the decor. I like all the little things in conversation that suggest, without hammering home, that they're living quite frugally. Yeah. The fact that he kind of gives her a treat of a free sample from the office, and they've got no cigarettes left when he wants to have a smoke. And
they smoked the last of the pack, and he picks one out of the flower pot and still makes a joke about, the cigarettes are blooming nicely.
We meet Elizabeth Sellers, the actress playing his wife Anne, who is quite a well-experienced actor at this time. I think after this she seemed to move more into TV. But it's an interesting choice. I find she's quite regal and quite well-spoken, and it gives their relationship the feeling that she's married below herself slightly.
Yeah, I mean, there's a scene that I just love coming up like later on, but she
seems more intelligent and emotionally intelligent, and she seems to be the one kind of, you know, emotionally holding things together in the relationship.
But I think where this film, one of the things I really liked about this film was the female characters and how they're not just kind of plus ones, you know, like Anne, the wife, has quite a lot to say for herself.
Yeah.
And is pretty much on the nose with her observations of her husband. And later on, this teenage girl, Jackie, that we meet as well, by the end of the film, her arc, she's become much more self-aware and is stepping out of the shadows of the men in her life. And I think there's something quite brave about the women in this.
I'm less keen on the way that Jackie is characterised, but yeah, I think you're spot on with Anne. I think it's partly the way that she looks as well. She's got that slightly, should we say, well-bred look with a slightly weaker chin.
Yeah, she looks like...
she looks like a royal.
She has an air of Grace Kelly about her, you know, who's quite famous for being an actress that married into the Monaco monarchy.
It's unfortunate that their children have... their son has a fake voice. Did you notice that?
No, has he been dubbed?
His first few lines make me think, dubbed. It's unfortunate. I saw that. Have you seen the Big Train sketch from years ago? It's just about the Billy Piper fan club, and it's set in a 50s household.
Oh, right.
And just as an aside, the children have terribly dubbed voices.
Oh, okay.
I'd seen that quite recently, and that suddenly came to mind when I was watching The Sun. Like, hello, Daddy!
Oh, yeah.
But then I'm not sure. Sorry, that's a bit snarky and unnecessary.
I thought there's a really nice little line in there where you hear the little boy say, "Mummy, can I have a drink of water?" And she says, "No, you can't. Go back to bed." Yeah, that's it. 50s parenting.
The actual content of the scene is that Johnny is worried, but he does not confess to Anne that he doesn't have insurance for the car. He tells her it's been stolen, am I right?
Yeah, he tells her it's been stolen. He's been to the police station, and the police say that they recover 80% of stolen vehicles within 48 hours or something. And so she's quite reassured by that fact. But what we later find out is he's quite panicked because, you know, his whole life is hinging on this car, basically. Yeah. It's the one thing that could change his status. It could improve his work prospects. You know, the very nature of having a car for him as a salesman could dramatically increase his potential for promotion within the company.
Which I kind of get the feeling is something that he needs, judging by his figures. And I guess in the next scene we find out how that affects him. He makes a sales call and arrives late to meet a Mr. Pennington at a department store.
Yeah.
Played by John Guillermin.
Yeah, he's kind of in and out, isn't he?
Yeah. But he absolutely steals the scene.
Yeah.
I have to say, John Guillermin appearing in anything I watch increases the amount by which I like it by about 25%. So even one scene is enough to set me
He's
smiling.
really good in it as
He's
well.
fantastic.
Where he just says to him, we've known each other for a long time. Don't try and sell me so hard. Just really puts him in. And you can see John is still trying to keep a jolly face on it, even though he's been put in his place.
Yeah, he's really embarrassing and trying too hard.
And that sort of jolly, nervous giggle that he has, you can feel the desperation starting to seep out of him.
But Le Measure just balances it perfectly. It's just that you can see the slight irritation and impatience, but he's covering it with absolute professionalism and patience, and just letting this man play out, and then just quietly putting him in his place and walking away. He's not rude. He's not polite. Takes the sample.
It's quite a beautiful set, that as well. You can see the painted backdrop.
Oh, is it?
About halfway into the set to give it the added depth.
Oh, yeah. Again, I just assumed it was a location. So we're back at the office after this.
He's called in to see
Mr. Berger.
Mr. Berger Jr.
Did you notice who Mr. Berger Jr. was?
No.
One of the most, for people of a certain age, one of the most famous voices in Britain. It's Peter Jones, the voice of the book in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, you sort of get this hint of a relationship between John and Mr. Berger Sr.
Yes.
Later on, we get a little hint that he was in the army, and maybe there's some kind of old connection there that's carried him through this far.
It's quite nicely filmed. It's good basic film craft that you get right in close on their faces when Johnny tells his lie about having just gotten a car at the end of the scene. Yeah.
It's a brilliant performance again, isn't it? Because you can see like the lie just gets stuck in his throat a little bit, and then he has to push through and make it convincing and back it up, and he's propping up the lie. And he's quite an honest man, I think, which is, I think, a nice sort of subtext to the film, is that he's an honest man and he just wants things to be done right, and he wants his car back, and that's it.
Yeah, and there's also the fact that he's not built to be a salesman because of that. He's not built to lie, and he's not built to kind of bullshit people and get them to. But because he's honest, he finds it hard, and that's why he's not. Well,
his method is kind of pressuring as well, isn't it? And Berger Jr. says to him, there's new methods of salesmanship. You can convince people instead of just putting the pressure on. And I think that there is something about all this pressure that's building up on John that kind of informs his decisions later on in the film. We feel his pressure at home, his pressure at work, and then his frustration at just losing his car and not being able to just take it back straight away.
There's another bit at the end of this scene, one of those things I was mentioning before. It's more prominent here. The scene ends and it holds on Berger Jr. looking at the figures and looking quite doubtful after Johnny's left the scene and left the room.
Yeah, he says to him, your figures are low, and he's like, I work in a poor area, it's different at Christmas, and he's like, well, here's your Christmas figures. It's just, you feel for him, don't you?
And there's a really nice use of sound in the very next scene where he's out in the office, and so you've got people like pushing past, leaving, and it's kind of the noise is just kind of amped up slightly, and it's really slightly.
It's a little bit staccato, isn't it? Sort of.
Yeah, it's kind of jabbing
high heels
at you.
and phones ringing, and yeah.
And there's all this stuff going on as he's fretting and calling the police. And in the background, you have like quite an unpleasant little detail of Spink handing in his ton of orders.
That's it.
In contrast to Johnny's like thin sheaf. Yeah, it's really nice kind of like background detail to build the mood. And then he crosses over the road to speak to Alfie Barnes, the newspaper salesman played by Mervyn Johns, who you've seen in everything made in Britain. It's a tricky scene. That was the first set that I thought looked like a set.
Oh, yeah, okay.
The slightly slummy flat that Barnes lives in. It was the first time I thought it was a little bit overdressed and didn't feel quite right spatially. Next, we're in the Victory Cafe, where there is jazz and ne'er-do-well Teds and tits.
A blonde bombshell, yeah.
It's all the stuff that the young people like is all in this scene. Cypriot cafe owner.
Yeah.
It's all there.
In the credits, he's just credited as the Cypriot.
The Cypriot.
Oh, no, sounds like he's in a Guy Ritchie movie. Have you been down to see the Cypriot?
It's a clunky scene full of lots of slightly awkward colour, and I don't know how well any of this played at the time, but for me it's a little bit awkward. Cummings goes to the Victory Cafe. He was directed there by Alfie Barnes. And he goes there and hangs around whilst there's a bunch of kind of sniggering, guffawing teddy boys in the background
Well,
listening to the
he's been
jukebox.
told that Tommy stole his car, so he wants to just talk to him and say, like, just give me my car back. You know, he's trying to be as direct as possible in resolving this situation, isn't he? So
yeah,
they do take the piss.
yeah, and I find this a bit tricky. Again, I don't know how well this material actually played at the time, but watching it now, it's like Tommy's taking the piss, and the jokes that he's cracking aren't funny at all on any level.
I quite liked it that he did confess to taking the car and then told this tall tale about driving it to Edinburgh and leaving it there. And
Yeah, I just wish that when they have kind of characters like this, they give them some good material so that it's not so much of a chore for the viewer. I do find it a little bit, he exudes no menace whatsoever. He's not funny. He's not clever.
yeah.
And given that it's Adam Faith and it's supposed to be like kind of like a charismatic young man, he's got really terrible dialogue, especially when he leaves and gets on his bike and says,
"I don't even know this crumb," and he starts accusing me of pitching his car. "I've never seen your rotten car, and if you think so, you better tell the coppers, but don't tell me."
This is the first time we really get some proper time with Tommy to try and work out what kind of spirit he is, and he comes off as a bit of a dick and, like I say, definitely not very smart.
It's a shame because he's built up so well in the opening sequence that you think he might have some menace or he might be an interesting character, but he's kind of a wet lettuce throughout, and from this scene onwards, I don't know, I just had a tough time with the character throughout. I'll flag up different bits as we go, but
yeah, sure.
For this scene, he's got terrible dialogue, terrible material. He's not really anything of anything.
He's quite a pretty face. Yeah. Oh shit! Yeah, I know what you're saying.
And Carol White, who's famously, one of the British movie sex bombs of the '60s, is there purely, it seems, in this scene for visual interest, shall we say?
Yeah. Well, I think the idea that she is Tommy's girlfriend that Lionel has taken.
Well, yeah, Lionel Meadows turns up and whisks her off in his flash car, despite the fact that Tommy and her seem to be a couple and seem to be quite intimate. So I guess that's set up to be explored later. And then, go on, I know you want to talk about the scene outside the cafe.
Yeah, I quite like that. I thought it was slightly overcut, but I liked.
I thought
I liked the ambition of it. It felt like a really nice editing experiment.
Well, I was expecting you to go into rhapsodies about that because it is quite bold.
Yeah, no, I liked it. It just caught me by surprise. It was maybe some jazzy editing.
I liked it a lot. It was good jazzy editing. I felt it went on 3 times as long as it needed to.
I know. There's some repeats in there.
Yeah, the longer it went on, the more you realised how it kind of gave itself away, how it wasn't really working spatially.
How it wasn't shot for that as well. Yeah. But I mean, is it worth just sort of putting it into like context for time? This is the point when motorcycle gangs were, patrolling the streets of England, and I think there was a fear of motorcycles and kids on bikes, and this is just before we get the mods as well.
Oh, sure. It's just, yeah.
I think maybe grown-ups going to see this film were probably terrified of teenagers. It'd be like us going to watch a film about like hoodies or something.
Yeah, but you're not, though, are you? I mean, I think that's something that movies trade on, just to allow themselves to have stock villains based on whatever the latest folk
torn from the headlines.
Folk devil's moral panic thing is.
Yeah, that's.
I'd imagine most adults watching this would go, "Oh, it's a fair approximation of some kids
on bikes."
I know some kids, and a lot of them are all right, though. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, are you sure you live in this country in this era?
I've got a note here saying that things are moving fast at this point.
Yeah.
The scenes get quite short and quite choppy, don't they?
Yeah. But I like that. There's something panicked about it now.
Yeah, the pace gets quite frantic towards the end. I couldn't make coherent notes towards the end because there was so little to latch onto.
Yeah, it's fast, isn't it?
Yeah, but you get another late sales call to a beauty parlour. Which
oh my god, he's an hour late, isn't he?
Yeah, and it ends disastrously when he loses his rag and insults one of the...
Yeah. There's a really nice sound design here where the bus idling just carries over from the interior to exterior as well, which I thought was really nice.
And then Tommy goes to Meadows' garage, and finally, half an hour into the movie, Peter Sellers, who I'd imagine was the main draw for a lot of people,
Yeah.
makes a full appearance.
He does. Yeah, and he's sort of... I mean, I don't know how you feel about this, but I really like his performance. I like him kind of not running away with the film. I think it's Richard Todd's film from beginning to end, and I really love his performance. But I'm really happy when Sellers is on screen as Lionel Meadows. I really like this character for him.
I'm less keen on the performance, but I think it's a byproduct of becoming less keen on Peter Sellers over time.
Is that because you're kind of looking through all of his work? And for me, like Sellers has almost been distilled down to two schools of thought. There's Clouseau, you fool. There's that, or there's stuff he does with Kubrick.
Right, I've seen a lot more, so I've got like a slightly broader range. I know that like obviously the Pink Panther films are most people's entry point into it.
Of a generation,
Of a
they used to be on
yeah.
TV,
Every Christmas.
and half term, and summer holidays. They used to be on, every couple of months there'd be one or the other.
Yeah, I have always subscribed to the Peter Sellers as godlike genius thing, and fabulous actor and highlighting every film that he's in. But I think it's just obviously it's time passing and fashions of acting change, and how you view people's performances change based on styles of acting having developed over the years.
Sure.
And I do find a lot of his stuff verging on pastiche, verging on caricature and parody, and I did think those touches of this. I thought like the first half of this performance where he's kind of tightly controlled, and where Meadows is talking through his teeth, and I did feel it wasn't that well modulated a performance. I felt it was like your archetype sleazy northern cabaret performer type performance, just translated into a criminal role. I'm not that crazy about it.
I just feel like he reminds me of people that I've known that like are really anxious and have like high blood pressure and get really stressed, and have kind of reached a point where they're able to take control of that, and they feel quite comfortable, but it doesn't take much to push them back into their old ways. And I think like he just kind of nailed that. Like he'd reduced himself to a simmer when he's probably spent his whole life at the boil up to this point, and he was just he's finally comfortable. He's got all the pieces in place. Nothing's going to undo his kind of very small criminal empire and this kind of scam he has with retagging the cars and making a profit on the side. And it just felt like he had it all kind of laid out. He's got like the teenage girlfriend who he can walk into the club on his arm, and to be seen as the successful gangster a la Cray brothers, something like that. And there's just this one guy, he keeps referring to him as the lipstick peddler, who's threatening that tiny empire. And I liked it that he went from simmering just to like back onto the boil.
I didn't feel any of that. I next time I watch it, I'll have to try and keep that in mind. It just felt like fairly one-dimensional sleaze to me, and there's a lot of kind of.
He's really sleazy, isn't he?
Yeah, don't necessarily see how he would be so successful in business when he's so clearly a distrustworthy. You see him dealing with a female customer, and he's apparently it works and people are taken in. But you're watching this character thinking, so sleazy. He's even immaculately dressed, he's kind of like dripping with snake oil. It's horrible.
I just have a little note here where Peter Sellers says to Jack, he says to her, "Oh, you're naughty. You're naughty." I thought that was really sleazy. But there's something about the garage business that you just get a tiny bit of in that scene where he has like 100 customers on account, so he's giving credit out to the community, so people are dependent on him, and I think that it's a different time as well, isn't it, where a small business would be like the centre of the community.
Yeah, and it would work as part of the community. Yeah. I guess it's worth mentioning at this point about the roles.
Yeah, this is a really good point, actually.
Yeah, apparently Todd was initially playing the Meadows role, and Sellers was playing the Johnny Cummings role. And I think Sellers wanted to play against type, wanted to play against his comedy background, and wanted to be the villain, so managed to convince everyone to swap the roles. Would have been interesting to see Todd in the Meadows role, because Todd was considered like a heroic actor. He was a D-Day veteran who'd been a hero in Dam Busters and stuff.
Yeah, that's it. And he'd played like Robin Hood and Rob Roy. He was pretty heroic.
Yeah, it would have been interesting either way around, but it's interesting to see Todd as a kind of a small man struggling.
There is something about actors playing against type, and whether that works because you have so much investment. Like Sellers, as soon as he comes on screen, I feel like there's a muscle memory smile waiting to come back through because I've had so many like pleasurable experiences watching him. Even being there, I think is the one that most of us go to for his kind of straightest role. And with this, I was still expect. There's a couple of points where I laughed anyway when he's talking. There's one scene where he's talking about the lipstick peddler and then Tommy Towers, and then Jackie's like, "What are you all trying to do to me? You're trying to ruin me," and that really made me laugh.
Well, that's why it doesn't work for me, because it feels like another Peter Sellers, another Peter Sellers kind of character.
It's
performance.
A character, yeah,
and it's and not even character performance, like a character pastiche performance sometimes, which can slip into comedy if you. And it's such a big character as well.
Yeah, that's it. Because everyone else is sort of playing it
really straight.
Yeah, apart from Richard Todd, who is, has really big range in this. I think everyone else is pretty like comfortably one note. They're just like very simple characters.
I had a note that it felt like a radio performance just because it was so voice based, but with with a distinctive look added. So it's like a radio performance. It was quite broad, as radio performances have to be, but then he's just got like a single, sleazy light entertainer's suit and spiv mustache look, and that's the character.
But I think he sort of pulls that apart as well. By the end, as he's kind of coming back on the boil, that he has this whole thing with Jackie where he's like, "I don't want you drinking, don't drink, it's ugly." And then we see him later on where he finally gives up and he hits the source himself. So like it's the idea that he's...
But again, that felt really, it didn't feel subtle to me. That felt really theatrical.
Yeah, but like all of his clothes are dishevelled,
but it's exactly
tie,
yeah, and
he's back to the kind of the northern lad from the streets, ready to like fight his way out of trouble. I thought that was a nice kind of deconstruction of of the character.
Okay, can we talk about Meadows and Jackie? Because I think
it's fucking dark, man. I think they bullet point it in the script, but like it's a horrible. Once you piece it all together, it's really horrible.
But it feels really incoherent to me, the whole thing. I do get a nasty whiff of kind of like Jackie's there in order for Carol White to be seductive and sit around in her bra for a bit, and the script is guiding you towards those situations.
Yeah, but I think like when she does, there's a scene where he's like, "Come on, love, come on," and she takes her jumper off. Like you see her in a bra, but like there's nothing alluring about her. Her look is one of broken, like a child broken by men. And I think all the way through we get these subtle hints that she was in some sort of remand centre for wayward girls, and he's plucked her out of there somehow to keep her out of prison, but is controlling her, and she's basically looking for another man to help, and Tommy is like a pathetic teenage boy that can't also enable her to get out of this cycle of
I see the pieces are there, but they don't come together for me to be a particularly well drawn character, and because of that it does feel a bit exploitative.
I think, if I'm honest, it was kind of second time round because I was caught up in the drama with the men, but the second time round I really appreciated the female characters more and was better able to piece together Jackie's story. Any kind of decent human being would offer some kind of support or an escape, and obviously Meadows is just like keeping her as a kind of teenage sex toy.
Well, I think he thinks that he's helping her. He thinks that he's supporting her. I think in his moral system he is actually helping her out, because otherwise she'd be, as he says, she'd be on her back somewhere in some back alley or something. But yeah, this is a key scene for Tommy as well. Establishing how Meadows has him completely under his thumb.
This scene, which is a big kind of introduction to Peter Sellers and his character and his relationships with the teenagers in his life. One is his supposed girlfriend and the other is his lackey.
Yeah, Tommy has been kind of not entirely sure where Tommy's character is going to go, because he seemed like an arrogant youth at the Victory Cafe. But then when you see him with Meadows, he's completely ground down.
Yeah, but I mean, Meadows is kind of saying to him, I told you not to steal cars within 5 miles of here. Why did you go roughing up the old boy? You wait for my instructions. You don't think for yourself. It's kind of, that's the line, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's true. But if Tommy were as arrogant and forthright and headstrong as as you would expect a teenage character played by Adam Faith to be. You know, you would have obviously you would have towed the line, but you would have stuck up for him. So, oh, I don't know what you're making such a fuss about, and you would have got. But he's absolutely crushed.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, literally crushed. You know, Lionel crushes his hand in the
record player.
Solid lid of a record player.
Mm.
But I wonder if this isn't supposed to infer just how brutal Lionel can be, or has been in the past. You know, the fact that everybody's quite scared and intimidated.
Yeah, it's just an interesting choice to make Tommy so weak, because all of the other people that he deals with day to day, they get flashes of it as well. You know, but they all seem to be able to stand up to them for themselves up to a point. You know, when he goes to see the other garage owner, he initially kind of mouths off to him, but you know, he is cowed after a while.
Yeah,
but
that's it.
It just feels odd that Tommy, being such an arrogant teenager, is automatically, you know, he's got nothing in him. And then Meadows visits Alfie. He pops into the pub outside which Alfie sells papers.
I really like this scene. He sort of orders a drink, and then he's sort of really nimble as he nips that. You know, you remember when pubs had outside toilets, you know, and the kind of trough that led into the gutter, and he kind of walks out into the backyard, and then nimbly sort of leaps over the fence and goes in through the back door. I really like that little sequence. You know, he's providing himself with an alibi. You know, we can kind of see his thought process.
There's a really nice cross-cutting between this and Johnny watching out of the window as well.
Oh yeah, good point.
Ends with that really nice cut to just Meadows like thumping Alfie straight into it. And then we
get a crushed terrapin here.
Crushed terrapin.
I think that's a real terrapin, don't you? That goes under the heel. I don't think there's any fancy FX work there. I was like, oh, they just killed that terrapin.
I don't like to think about it that way. I just like to think that it was faked, but it being 1960, it's really horrific.
So as Lionel's crushing a terrapin, we also get the final straw for John back in the office. Yeah, he gets fired, doesn't he?
Yeah. I've got a note saying that you cut to Spink's knowing reaction first, and it's a nice bit of sort of character playing. Spink's barely disguised kind of glee and avarice.
Johnny's looking out the window, isn't he, watching Lionel go from into the pub, and then he's trying to work out what's going on when he sees Alfie going up the stairs.
Yeah,
and then he gets called in
and sacked. And he's allowed to stay on in the stock room for a week or so until he can find another job.
He has to hand over his accounts, doesn't he?
Yeah, it's a really difficult scene because you've got, you know, Spink knows what's going on, and he can barely disguise how excited he is to grab hold of the accounts. He pulls up a chair and says, "Let's talk about it."
Yeah, it's now a good time, old boy. And you know, John does put on the mask and is polite and starts handing over his career, basically, isn't he?
And then, as Johnny leaves the office, John Barry comes up with this music for the discovery of Alfie's body. Shane, discuss.
That's fantastic.
It's just, I'm sure it may have worked better at the time, but for now it just feels like show tunes music for the death of a character.
Oh, I think it's all about counterpoint.
Okay.
Yeah. But Alfie's gassed himself, hasn't he? He's finally turned on the gas.
Yeah. And
then we have the break-in scene.
Yeah, there's a very odd cut in this. It's one of those ones that, I mean, it's not a deal breaker, but it's where Johnny's walking in darkness in a wide, and then you cut as the lights come on, and it's another wide that's framed slightly different, where you reveal Meadows leaning against a car.
Yeah.
And it jars slightly for me, but I don't know if that's good.
There's another one later in the scene as well when he sort of steps forward,
flaps his tie.
Yeah.
Yes, but I kind of like those cuts. I like
Nouvelle Vague, aren't they?
Well, yeah, I like those in Martin Scorsese movies. Like, nobody seems to use them anymore except Scorsese. Things that, technically speaking, are a bit wrong, but the fact that they're a bit wrong gives the scene a bit more energy.
Yeah, you're right.
There's a lot of kind of non-continuity of cutting of dialogue, and I watched The Irishman recently, and he does it again in that, as he does in every film. Like, when he cuts to another take within a conversation or even a monologue, like, it's a slight change of tone, or it's just a few frames too short, so you know it's a cut and you know it's a change, but it just livens things up a bit.
Yeah, okay.
rather than just being smooth and continuous and perfect.
I quite like this where we in this scene. So John Cummings has broken into Peter Sellers' garage. You know, he's like crossed the line, breaking and entering, and you know, Sellers is like, "I can have you on that. I can have you," and instead he's just like, you know, look around. Can you see a car? No, right. Fuck off then, isn't he? Basically. And then when he digs his heels in Cummings, he's like, "I want my car. Like that's it. I want my." He's just like, "Right, Cliff, sort him out." And he takes a proper walloping, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Not on the face, Cliff.
Yeah.
What does he call
Use
him?
your loaf.
Yeah, use your loaf.
Jackie's watching this, and she's very shocked and upset. I'm not sure exactly why. I guess because she's never met Cummings before, and it must be something that she's used to.
It gives her a little bit of sympathy for him because he's kind of now under Lionel's glare as well. But also maybe it helps her break her kind of, I don't know, what do you call it? What's that? Not Stockholm syndrome. Is it Stockholm syndrome? Yeah. So maybe, you know, helps her kind of
break out of that frame.
A little bit of that as well. You know, seeing something so ugly. I mean, it's a proper like.
It's kicking, isn't it?
Yeah. Really sort of fucking goes to work on the body, basically. So the next sequence is John Cummings at home with his wife, but it's really clever that the inspector has also somehow been involved in this because he's the one that's deposited him back home.
Yeah.
The next morning, you know, after a beating, he's still trying to get dressed and get back to work, and you know, wants to try and save his job. His whole life is slipping through his fingers now.
Yeah. And Anne has kind of realised how far this obsession is taking him. He's getting severely beaten. It's about time to confront him.
He's obsessed, isn't he?
Yeah, it's time to confront him.
And this is what's nice about this scene is that Anne steps over to the window, and it's kind of a repeat on the earlier scene where John is fighting his corner with her and trying to convince her that he's right.
Yeah.
And this time she takes his place, and she kind of, I mean, I don't think we can do it justice. We just have to let it play this chunk of dialogue that she has.
I want to tell you about last night.
Please, Johnny, it doesn't matter. I don't care about that old car, not now.
You don't care about it. I do. It's right there in front of my eyes. Don't you remember all the time and effort and hard cash we put into getting that car? That's why I went back to Meadows' garage. Because that car is worth it. I have to have it, Anne. Don't you understand? It's going to make all the difference.
Yes, Johnny, I can see it all right. If you want to know, I see a whole lot more than one car. I see a whole procession of cars. Everything in life you ever wanted that was going to make all the difference.
What do you mean?
The pipe dreams, Johnny. It's like those glasses you wear. You don't really need them. And no more real than that photographic studio you were going to start. Every penny you ever got from the army thrown away.
Now, wait a minute, Anne. That's not fair. You always said yourself it was a good idea. If I'd only gone into it alone instead of taking on a partner.
No, Johnny, it didn't work. It wasn't practical. It's like our cottage in the country. Every summer a new plan, new set of drawings, another dream. This one's going to turn into a nightmare. Let it go, Johnny, before something worse happens to you. And to us.
Anne, you don't understand. I could have done these things. I only made one mistake. I didn't hang on. I didn't see it through.
Because you're not made that way. You're not tough enough, Johnny. You're not meant to push and shove your way through life. And I don't want you to, Johnny. I love you just as you are.
It's unfortunate, but absolutely not a deal breaker. It's a fantastically written scene.
Yes, so
and
good.
Anne's shot is played out on a very slow track into her.
Yeah, yes.
It's unfortunate that even though we were watching it on a very heavily compressed file, you can still see the focus goes at the end.
It's heartbreaking, that, isn't it?
It is, and
technically.
I think standards of projection were a lot worse back in the
Yeah, you can imagine some
60s.
ropey old print going hand to hand
Yeah.
around Soho cinemas.
16mm prints in local cinemas and stuff. But it is a terrible shame, and you can just hats off to them for still using it because it's a fantastic.
It's probably
take.
the best take. Do you know who the focus puller was?
No.
Peter MacDonald,
Who is
the director of Rambo 3.
Oh, right. Yes,
and
his corrupting influence
very
even then.
accomplished cinematographer in his own right.
Right.
Yeah, but I mean, this scene, I was watching it and I was with John the whole way through. I felt the blood draining out of my body. I thought she was talking to me just for a minute. All my sort of failed ideas, and to have someone that you love giving you that cold, hard truth, I just felt heartbroken for him. It's such a good performance, like from both of them, because he hears every word that she says. You see that on his face.
I don't think you have to necessarily feel that you're the same sort of person as him to feel the scene. I think for anybody to be told by their loved one the harsh truths that they need to hear is just unbearable, isn't it?
Yeah. But she says to him, she says, I love you for who you are. But she says to him, like, you're just not made that way. Like, you're not the tough guy.
Yeah, you're not meant to push and shove your way through life.
Yeah, that's it.
And again, this kind of underlines my slight feeling that she's the emotional superior in the relationship for sure. She's absolutely in control. I don't mean controlling, but she's the one who has to take the reins.
She's the anchor for the family. Yeah, definitely.
Then we have what?
Yeah, a little sort of third act montage. Yeah, it's really nice.
At work in the stock room, fretting at home.
And the newsstand's closed, obviously. We a little shot of the empty newsstand.
Quite desolate, isn't it?
Yeah.
Spink being smug in the stock room, and then it kind of...
The clock's ticking as well. He's at home with the clock ticking. Tick, tock, tick, tock.
And it segues into the actual scene where Johnny finally loses his rag at work.
With Spink, yeah.
With Spink.
Yeah, just launches a solid wooden sample case.
Crate at him across the room.
It's massive, yeah. I thought it was going to hit him like square in the face, but yeah. And then he's just like, and you can tell him to shove the job as well, and kind of walks out. But then what I love about it is, like, it's a genuine impulse moment, and he hasn't thought it through, because then he just stood outside like, oh shit, what do I do now?
So after this, both of our notes reflect that things move at an incredible clip. Lots of short fragmented scenes moving the plot forward.
There's a really nice one I like with John in the pub looking at job ads, and they all need a car. Like, it's really like, each time he says, with salesman needed, with car, like each time it's a slap round the face. He's getting more and more frustrated at just not having his car. Like, he worked so hard to get the car, spent all of the money on the car, insured it as best as he could afford the car, and then it's gone like a week after he bought it. It was brand new.
Eventually, in all of this, Jackie ends up going back to Johnny and Anne's flat, and there's a fabulous scene there. Jackie, completely out of place in Johnny's flat, which has been brilliantly set up as like this cozy nest of domesticity.
Yeah.
And then you've got this kind of blonde bombshell fallen woman sitting in the middle of it, and you just realise this can't happen. This is real kind of clash here. Yeah,
but there's something really nice about Anne just saying to John's like, oh, we have to help her, and Anne's just like, do you think she is here to help you?
But there's also the sense of just the whole thing's just a hideous miscalculation, isn't it? And he's only doing it in order to try and get his car back. It's just like, even with Jackie just sitting in the middle of their lounge, it's kind of like their world is already turned upside down.
Yeah.
And then Meadows turns up.
And he fucking kicks the door in, screaming, smashes something else to use as a stabbing weapon.
Yeah, it's.
But again, John's powerless in this scene. He freezes.
Yeah.
And it's Anne that screams for help and alerts the neighbours and saves the day.
But there's no holds barred. The daughter comes to the door, and the scene makes a point of showing her witnessing this and being upset by it. Anne's as threatened by Meadows as Johnny is. There's no chivalry here at all, is there?
Yeah, definitely.
And when he leaves, he just shoves past her.
Yeah.
It's a really brutal scene, isn't it? It
really
really is upsetting.
Yeah. And John, all he can do is kind of comfort the kids. He doesn't know how to handle this situation. I think he hasn't reached that conclusion that he's going to have to kind of get his hands dirty.
Yeah.
I think he's avoiding it, to be honest. That's not the type of person he is.
I think it's quite a common trait. Everyone feels big inside. Everyone thinks that if they were ever, encountered something on the street, or if they're ever threatened in some way, that you'd be able to stand up for yourself.
Yeah.
I know I do, but then whenever you're confronted with any genuine danger, you find your bottom lip trembling, and you find yourself kind of shriveling inside, and not just frozen, but actually terrified, and you realise how much of a leap it is to be able to be that person that you think you are. And it's still that, I think, for Johnny. And then Anne issues Johnny with an ultimatum: you have to stop doing this. Can't you see how far it's gone?
Yeah,
Somebody's
just let it
breaking
go.
into our home and threatening us with a broken vase. Johnny's still, I've got to see it through. I never see anything through.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Scott.
Doesn't she say we won't be here when you get back or something? It's one of those kind
Exactly. The next really interesting scene, and again I might be kind of flogging a dead horse here, is Jackie goes back to Tommy's, and Tommy is a broken man, injured and crushed by Lionel in spirit again.
Yeah, his hand's all bandaged up now, isn't it?
Jackie seems to like this. The suggestion seems to be that Jackie likes kind of vulnerability, and she likes...
Well, I think it's the first time Tommy's honest as well about what he's capable of. He says to her, I'm not smart like you. I don't have your brains. He basically says to her, "How do we get out of this? I need your help, not the other way. I can't save you, but maybe you can help me save us."
Yeah. My notes suggest that I was less impressed with that, but I'm not going to argue the same points again. My feeling is that you get from the way that she tags along with Johnny, and the way that she's kind of sympathetic to Tommy, that she likes vulnerability. She likes vulnerable men rather than domineering.
Yeah, but
people
I think
like Meadows. But
what we get with her backstory is that she's probably been dominated by men her whole life, and somebody that's willing to be open and honest with her is a better option.
There's something very, 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 very small and very surprising, which I wasn't expecting at this stage in the film, which is something new visually. You get an exterior daytime wide of the flats when you cut to the next day.
Oh yeah, okay.
And then it's carefully planned. You pan along and track in on the flat,
window,
and then you cut to Johnny inside, and it's quite refreshing. Not many films, even to this day, will give you something fresh.
Yeah.
Visually, in terms of an establishing shot.
And I think those blocks look really nice as well, don't they?
Yeah.
They'd be brand new at this point. Those kind of tower blocks.
And then it's got my favourite edit in the entire film,
where Jackie comes thundering up the stairs.
Yeah.
With Cliff.
It's a really confident change of situation and location in a handful of cuts, which are really complex in describing but work really fluidly.
Yeah, definitely.
It's really nice. Cut from Anne closing the door, and then you overlap Jackie shouting "Tommy, Tommy," and then you cut to Tommy in bed reacting to that.
Yeah.
And then you cut to Jackie running upstairs with Cliff in pursuit.
It's really nice.
It's great.
Yeah, but I think it is that sort of... It's a shot in the arm, isn't it? Because this is the third act now.
Yeah.
And it is like balls to the wall. Now it just doesn't stop. There's one point where it slows right down, and that you just hold your breath for like 3 minutes wondering what's going to happen. Yeah. It's really confident filmmaking here, isn't it?
I did like the interrogation with McKinnon and Williams. I thought it was a very, very polite British take on a film noir interrogation, wasn't it?
I like the way he just sort of sits down right behind him. There's something weird about somebody sitting behind you, isn't there? Like talking into your ear.
I did put a note in that there's so much going on here, so much back and forth with all the different supporting characters, that you do lose track of Johnny's obsession a bit. And I've said that it seems a bit silly when he's with Williams at the garage again, still bleating about his car. For a film that's focused on his obsession and kind of makes that feel rightly central, it kind of loses that a bit. And I don't know if that's deliberate.
Well, I think the point is that the police aren't working at John's pace, and then they don't have the same focus that he does on one single car. And I think that's why we kind of go back the last time, because John feels... And the car's in there at this point, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like it's behind those gates. And there's that really nice sequence where they're getting all the stolen cars out, and I don't know if you noticed this, but how fast everybody drives in this film. They're all like hammering around London, aren't they?
Yeah,
like
screeching around corners, yeah.
Imagine that city when there wasn't so much traffic there. I always like that film Performance, just for the driving shots where you see like that dirty old London before they cleaned it up, and those empty streets. And it must have been quite nice just to roar around those kind of cobble streets, sliding sideways, and big old bathtub cars as well, swinging on like deep suspension. It must have been really fun.
Johnny sat in the Victory Cafe. I did like it, the scene with the Cypriot owner coming over and offering him some very heartfelt advice.
Yeah, he says it's okay to be scared of these guys.
I'm scared of these guys.
I'm scared of them. Yeah. It's a really nice moment, isn't it?
There's some really nice cross-cutting between Johnny and Meadows as they fume.
Yeah.
But with terrible music underscoring it.
Okay. I really like this bit. This was the bit where, like I say, they're both sat dead still. The music's really big. My heart was thundering, and I felt like I was holding my breath, waiting to see what would happen next. This was the point where I was like, "Oh, Matt's got to watch this. This is incredible. He's going to be like gushing over John Barry. We're going to be talking about Sellers, and No.
So then we have the final confrontation fight, which I've made a note. No music!
Yeah, no
Which
music.
makes it really brutal.
Yeah, it's really cool, man. But I just want to say, like, so we have this moment where they're waiting, and then there's the John Barry is like the horns are blaring and everything. But I love how John Cummings' character. I love how he's reached that moment where he's made a decision. Like he's gonna fuck it. He's gonna go in and do whatever. He duff this guy up if he has to get his car back. And I love like that moment where you can see it in his eyes that he's made that decision. And he stands bolt upright, knocks his chair flying, and then he realises he's in a cafe with a load of pensioners. So he picks the chair up and puts it back and stuff. You know, he's sort of really considerate at the same point. But I thought his performance was so good in there. It reminds me of like that moment in Heat where Neil McCauley has got away with it. He's got everything he needs and he's getting away with it.
They're taking the car as they're driving.
Yeah, and you're just looking at his face and you can see it cross his mind, and then he's like,
and he's thinking, no, it's all right.
I can't let that go. And this had that same sort of power. I was like, oh, he's going to do it. I was like, oh no, he's really out of his depth. Let's see how this goes. And then they go into that fight, and it's like...
Well, he kind of breaks down the door, breaks down a barricaded window to get in, and then uses a piece of wood from the barricade as a weapon.
With nails sticking out of it. But what the film does, which it's done a couple of times, is go back to a location and repeat the kind of the action, but everything's changed in it. So we've had like John and his wife in the flat where they switch positions for, you know, a little reality check, and now we've got the repeat of John breaking into Lionel's garage, and like the tables have turned again. He's like come in, he knows what he's doing, knows what he wants. Yeah, it's lovely seeing them face off. Like one has a crowbar and the other one has a plank of wood with nails sticking out. It's like, oh shit, this is gonna hurt. It's a
good brutal fight, and I do like the way that it's not too choreographed.
Yeah, it feels really realistic, doesn't it?
In the sense that, you know, obviously you'd have to block the whole thing out, but it's not blocked out and shot and cut to within an inch of its life.
No,
so
it's
things
really chaotic.
Yeah, things feel like disjunctive and odd and.
But there's a scene where like John picks up like chains, wraps them around,
and yanks him across the room with it,
and he goes fucking flying back like with such violence, like he's losing his footing, slipping on the oil, crashes into a hydraulic lift. You know, that starts coming down, and then like John's trapped under there. It's like it's really terrifying.
Yeah, and none of this is, you know, it's extremely violent, but none of it's overly dramatised. There's no music going on, and you do not know how it's going to end.
Yeah, that's it. And then John like rolls out of the way, and Meadows just like drives a car at him, like it nearly crashes into his head. Like the stuntman sat there as this car crashes in just above his head.
And it's only the gap between the front wheel and the front of the bonnet that you have that gap that saves his life, isn't it?
Yeah, you're definitely like you're choking on it. It's really scary. And then he like slams his hand in the door, which is maybe a little callback to where Lionel slams Tommy's
hand in the record player.
And then he fucking twats him on the back of the head with a massive wrench, sucker punches him and knocks him out completely, doesn't he? And then the cops turn up, you know, characteristically 3 minutes too late. It's so exciting, that end scene. It was one of those really surprisingly brutal fight scenes that I just wasn't expecting.
I do like the way that the whole of the end of the film, not just the fight scene, plays with you, because Williams allows him to drive what, you know, isn't actually proven to be. I mean, we know it is.
Yeah.
But as far as the police are concerned, it's a different colour. It's got a different logbook. It's got a different number plates. But Williams allows him to drive that home. And you think, okay. And then there's the sucker punch of getting home and finding that Anne's left him. And I was prepared to go with that as well.
Yeah, they could have done it.
It's a noir, isn't it? And they drag it out for long enough for it to feel quite painful. Yeah,
he sits down, doesn't he? And he's absolutely battered. His face is like ripped to shreds. His clothes are ruined. He's covered in oil and blood and snot and everything. And he's just sat there on his armchair in the darkness. And then a shadow passes over his face. Yeah. Not quite sure who it is. Thank God it's his wife.
It's his wife.
So I just want to talk about Richard Todd quickly, you know, because I think it's such a great performance from him. You know, I love seeing how vulnerable he is from the beginning, and he's putting a brave face on it. And I love as he lets his kind of mask drop, and that desperation is converted into this kind of wrath over something as trivial as his car being stolen, but the consequences of that on his life just like triggers something in him. By the end, I love seeing him wielding, you know, this plank of wood with the nails in and stuff. And I just think he's such a great actor. It's a shame that he had a few more movies after this, and then kind of slipped into TV. Like by the time he was 60, he was doing like Doctor Who and Murder She Wrote and Midsummer Murders and Holby and all of those as guest stars. But he was in The Long, the Short, and the Tall, which I did at school as a school play, which our drama teacher was really into. So we were all acting out this thing of like kidnapping a Japanese soldier, and that always stuck with me, that he was in that as well. And then he's in The Longest Day, the D-Day film, which I'd like to talk about, because you mentioned it before, that he was a D-Day hero.
Yeah.
But do you know the story that he was Captain Sweeney Todd of the 7th Parachute Battalion, 5th Parachute Brigade, British 6th Airborne Division, and was one of the guys that parachuted in after the gliders had been through on the longest day.
Right.
At D-Day, and he took part in the real action at the Pegasus Bridge. But when he came to be in The Longest Day, they offered him the chance to play himself, and he said, at this stage of my acting career, I couldn't take a part that small. So he played his own commanding officer, Major John Howard, and somebody else played him.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, it's a really nice sort of D-Day story, but just it seems like he was like Fleming's first choice to play James Bond, and
yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, it just seems like one of those actors. He kind of is. I don't know. Is he like a Richard Burton? Is he that kind of quality? Why? He's certainly not.
It's just the vagaries of
I know,
chance, isn't it?
Just such a shame, isn't it? When you see a performance like this, which I was on a knife edge all the way through the first time I watched it. I thought it was going to be one of those, oh, I say, old chap, no, because that's how it starts, and then he just kind of lets rip, man. It's so vulnerable, and yeah.
So this was your suggestion, and I didn't actually know you were suggesting it as a potential podcast thing. I thought you were just sort of like sharing it as something you should watch. I enjoyed it quite a bit the first time round, but didn't think I'd want to watch it again. But then when you suggest it for a podcast, yeah, it's okay. So I'm really glad I watched it a second time, because there's a lot in it that just kind of, if you're not that observant, kind of flows past you.
I think it's easy to just take it as another kind of late 50s, early 60s British genre film that has disappeared off the...
And to be fair, given what production schedules were like and what programming schedules are like, there were a lot of 50s and 60s forgettable movies made.
Yeah, they just churned them out, didn't they?
Yeah, they really did. And this is not one of those. I think next time I watch it, because we've watched it, I think from a DVD transfer, quite compressed, I would have to watch it in better conditions, because when you look at who the DOP was, I mean, it's a great looking film, but when you look at who the DOP was, did you look at his IMDb?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the most frustrating things about watching it, is once you know that the man that shot it, you're just like, come on, somebody out there, like,
somebody's got to get there.
Who's got the negs? Let's all chip in. Let's get a Kickstarter going.
I mean, this is the guy who shot, like, amongst others, Gone to Earth, The Small Back Room, The Red Shoes, and more for Powell and Pressburger.
Yeah, Tales of Hoffman, Ill Met by Moonlight.
Yeah, and then he's also shot for Stanley Donen, Two for the Road, which is a fantastic film. Shot for Billy Wilder, Joseph Losey. He's even shot an Abrams and Zucker movie, Top Secret.
Top Secret, yeah, which I keep pitching as a podcast, and you keep pushing back against.
No, I'll do that one.
I love Top Secret.
Yeah. To think that you're reduced to watching something that's clearly shot by a master in such reduced circumstances, it's just not right. Whilst we're talking about other contributors, as Ralph Sheldon, who's again is somebody who's his first feature, comes from a documentary and shorts background, varied career.
Yeah.
Highlights for me.
1985 when he did Shanghai Surprise and the Holocaust Covenant.
But he did do The Likely Lads, The National Health for Jack Gold, Villain, and hats off to him for editing a film directed by a master editor. He did the terrible movie Every Home Should Have One, directed by Jim Clark.
So, this, there's a DVD of it available. It's actually, the full film's on YouTube in pretty much the same quality as the DVD on the retrospective channel. We'll put a link to it in the podcast stuff. I mean, it's a
DVD you can buy for £3 or £4 off Amazon.
Yeah.
I would recommend it. I'm glad that I saw it.
Yeah, I mean, at the time it was banned in Finland, and I think that should let you know how fucking brutal it is. Yeah.
And they sold it hard in other countries on the basis of its brutality
I
and
know, I know.
sexuality, didn't they?
Yeah, if you catch up with our sort of enhanced YouTube version, we've got all the international film posters there, and they definitely make it look like some garish, sleazy British exploitation movie.
It didn't do particularly well on release, did it?
No.
I honestly think it's just because...
Did it even get released in the States? All I
Yeah,
could
it
see
did.
was...
The New York Times panned it.
Yeah, but that looked like a one-off screening like 3 years after it was completed.
I can kind of understand by 1960 there was an awful lot of film noir out there, and Peter Sellers not being a major international star wouldn't be enough to sell it.
Yeah.
It would just be a hard sell.
It feels like they tried to slip it in after Lolita came out, maybe.
Right. Yeah, it's that probably explains why it's something of a footnote these days. But I mean, we wouldn't be talking about it if we didn't recommend it for one reason or another.
Yes, I think it's quite brave in maybe it's second viewing stuff, but like the way the women come across. I love the East London location. Some of those spaces are still there for you to walk along and explore.
I would recommend it. I mean, I would never recommend anything as a noir because it's such an overused term, and it suggests familiar. This does kind of operate within that basic framework, but there's so many incidental pleasures, so many good performances and bits of detail and bits of craft that make it, more than just what it seems. It's just like, an average kitchen sink British gangster movie with a surprising Peter Sellers performance. It's far more than that.
Yeah, for me, there was just something about the kind of energy that the film had. I mean, I know that like there's quite a few first timers on it, like giving it their all, but I don't know. Like both the director and the actors were seasoned enough that they could have just turned up and done it by the numbers. And I think there's just something. The talent involved are really doing something special. I think the director, the cast. I think they're really like pushing and trying to get something more out of the material and the scenario and the setup, and the fact that it feels like really authentic on the streets. And I saw it and wanted to talk about it. I think that was the kind of reaction I had to it. Most films I see and then okay, good, I'll tick that off the list, but this one I saw and wanted to talk about it. That's why I sent it to you. I was like, have a look at this. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, something that could be just box ticking and just programming is really, really potent, isn't it? It's pretty powerful.
We'd probably be high-fiving each other now if it wasn't for the fact that you hated the music, and I really was like, wow, what a score! It's really good. It's so challenging and so exciting, and yeah. Maybe we could play out with a little bit of John Barry.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll take the headphones off and just let this play for you.